All right, so we're going to jump right into number 13. So let me go ahead and grab my pen here. So number 13 says n plus 1/4 equals 5/6. Okay, so yesterday I posted some videos on Khan Academy about how to operate with decimals. I'll be doing the same thing with fractions, just to assist you guys with solving fractions. Okay, so I want to make this as smooth as possible. Give you guys some review questions because I know you guys had a long spring break, so I just want to keep the brain juices flowing. Okay, so we have n plus 1/4. Okay, so if we review our steps from yesterday, we still have to locate our variable. So in this case, our variable is n, and determine the operation tied to the variable. So in this case, we are adding a 1/4 and use inverse on operation on both sides of the equation to solve. Okay, so we have to first figure out what is the inverse of addition. Okay, so I hope by now we know that it is subtraction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my balance because whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other. So we're going to have n plus 1/4, so the opposite. We're going to subtract 1/4 from both sides. Okay, so we know 1/4 minus 1/4 is going to be 0. So we're just going to be left with n on our left side. Now I'm going to go down here and we're going to rewrite our equation here. So we have 5/6 minus 1/4. Okay. Now with addition and subtracting fractions, you have to remember they have to have the same denominator. Okay. So in this video, we're going to focus on finding the least common denominator. Okay. So our denominators in this case is 6 and 4. Okay. So we have to figure out how can we make 6 and 4 the same number. Okay. So this should be a review, but just in case we're going to go through it. So for 6, we're going to multiply this to get to 12. And 4, we'll have to multiply that to get to 12 because that would be our least common denominator. Okay. So for 6, we have to figure out what we're going to multiply. So we have to multiply this by 2. Now whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator as well. So we're going to have to multiply this by 2 as well. Okay. And on this side, for our 4, we're going to have to multiply this by 3 because we know 4 times 3 is 12. And then whatever we do on the bottom, we have to do to the top as well. So now our new fraction is going to become 10/12 minus 3/12. Okay, and once our denominator is the same, all we're going to do is subtract the numerator. So 10 minus 3 will give us 7. And we're going to keep our denominator the same. So our answer in this case, n equals 7/12. Okay, so just to recap, we're focusing on finding the least common denominator in addition or subtraction of fractions. Okay, so in this case, we had to subtract 5/6 from minus 1/4. So we had to make sure our denominators were the same. We cannot subtract the 6 and the 4. Okay, they have to be the same denominator. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's go back. So we did 13. All right, so let's try 15. So let me go ahead and erase our whiteboard here. Okay, so 15 says negative 1/8. Don't forget that negative in front. Plus m equals negative 7 over 24. Okay, so we talked about this in class. That negative, we're just going to say it goes to the numerator. Okay, so now we have to focus on our directions that we had yesterday. So first we have to locate the variable. So let's go back to red here. So our variable in this case is m. Okay, and we have to figure out what operation is tied. Okay, so this was a tricky one that we had troubles in class. Okay, so yes, this plus sign is with the m, but remember this is a negative 1/8. Okay, so we read left to right. So the actual operation tied to it is a minus 1/8. Okay, so in order to get rid of that, we have to do the opposite. So we're focused on getting rid of the minus 1/8, not the plus sign. Okay, it's a minus 1/8 here. So we're going to draw our balance. Okay, so the key to here is remember we read left to right. Yes, there's a plus sign, but we're focused on getting rid of this minus 1/8. Okay, so the opposite of a negative 1/8 would be a positive 1/8. So we're going to have to add 1/8 to both sides. So we know negative 1/8 plus 1/8 is going to cancel out. We're going to be left with m. Okay, so you can see that the plus sign goes away because it's just a positive 1m. So we're just going to write it as m equals, and then we're going to come down here and rewrite our new equation. So we have negative 7 over 24 plus 1/8. Okay, so same thing, we have to focus on our least common denominator. So we have 24 and 8. So we already have 24, and I know I can multiply 8 somehow to get to 24. So I think that'll be our least common denominator. So what do I have to multiply 8 by? We're going to multiply it by 3. And remember, whatever we did to the bottom, the denominator, we have to do to the numerator as well. And just for showing out our steps, we're going to multiply 24 by 1, just so we know it's going to stay as 24. So 1 times negative 7 will give us negative 7 over 24 plus 3 over 24. Okay, so we know our denominator is going to stay the same. We're going to keep it as 24. Integer operations now. Remember, we have negative 7 plus 3. So keep, change, or however you want to do it. So we have negative 7 plus 3. That's going to give us negative 4. Okay? So our final answer is going to be negative 4 over 24. And yes, you could simplify your fraction, but for right now, let's just leave it as our final answer. So we're going to have negative 4 over 24. We'll focus on simplifying once we understand a little bit more how to solve each type of problem. Okay? So just to recap, we had to figure out our least common denominator again because we were adding fractions. So we had a 24 and an 8. I said we can multiply the 24 by 1, and we can multiply the 8 by 3 to get 24 on both sides. Then from there, we're just going to add, so negative 7 plus 3 will give us a negative 4. Okay? So that was number 15. Okay, so let's talk about something new in 17. So just erasing the whiteboard. So 17 says 2/3 x equals 48. Okay, so now we have something different here. We're not doing addition or subtraction. Okay, so we talked about yesterday, there's no addition or minus sign here. So we know this is multiplication. Okay, so it's 2/3 times x equals 48. Okay, so we know multiplication. Well, first we have to locate our variable. Right, step 1 says locate the variable. This is x. We have to figure out what's tied to that. We just talked about it, multiplication. So in this case, we have to do the inverse. Okay, so we know we have to divide by 2/3. But we learned as reviewed that we cannot really divide by fractions. We have to multiply what's called its reciprocal. Okay, so if you print this out in your notes, we're going to put this later, but to divide by a fraction, we have to multiply by its reciprocal. And reciprocal is just a fancy way of saying flipping it. Okay, so if we have 2/3, so we're actually not going to divide by 2/3. So let's erase that. We're going to multiply by its reciprocal. So if we flip this, the reciprocal is just a fancy way of saying flipping. So we're going to have 3 over 2. Okay? Draw our balance. And whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other. So we're going to multiply by 3 over 2. Okay? And since 48 is a whole number, we talked about this in class, we're going to put it over 1. So we can now see we have two fractions that we can multiply better. So the reason why we multiply by its reciprocal, because we have 3 times 2, that would be 6. 2 times 3, that would be 6. And we know that's going to simplify to 1. That is how we get the x by itself, because now this is going to become 1x. Okay, so I'm just going to draw the x here. Okay, so I'm showing you why we multiply by its reciprocal. Okay, so it's canceling out to just give us the x by itself. We bring down our equal sign. Now let's do our fractions over here. So we have 48 over 1 times 3 over 2. Now with multiplying fractions, you remember you just multiply straight across. So we're going to multiply our numerator, and then we're going to multiply our denominator. So 48 times 3 is going to give us 144. 1 times 2 is going to give us 2. And then we know 2 can go into 144 72 times. Okay, so x is going to equal 72. Okay, so just to recap, so our new word of the day is reciprocal. Okay, so reciprocal is just a fancy way of saying flipping a fraction. Okay, because we cannot divide by fractions, so we're going to multiply it by its reciprocal. So remember, change our division into multiplication, and we're going to flip to 3/2, and we're going to multiply that by on both sides. Okay, so let's do another example for practice. So I'm going to jump from 17. I'm not going to go to 19. I'm going to go to 22. All right, so get this all out the way. So looking at 22, we're going to have -1 and 1/3 equals 2r, excuse me. Now you can see our problem's a little different here, okay? So our variables on the right side of our equation, and we have a mixed number, okay? So let's go ahead and highlight our r, so we know it's on the right side. Okay, and now we have to convert -1 and 1/3, since it's a mixed number, into an improper fraction. Okay, so we know by doing that we have to multiply and then add. So 3 times -1 is going to give us -3. Then plus 1 is going to give us -2. So this is going to become -2 over 3. The denominator stays the same. And this is going to become still state 2r. Okay. So now we have our 2r. We have to focus on what we're going to do with the 2r. Okay. So we know that this is multiplication. We just saw that in the last problem. There's no addition or subtraction in between the two. Okay. So we know the opposite of multiplication is going to give us division. So we have 2r, we're going to divide by 2. But we just talked about that. We have a fraction over here, so we don't want to divide by 2 on both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert this 2 into a fraction. And we know a whole number is going to be 2 over 1. And now we're going to multiply by its reciprocal. So if we flip 2 over 1, it's going to then become 1 over 2. Okay? So we don't want to divide by 2 on both sides because we don't want to do fraction division. Okay? So we have 2 over 1, and we're going to change it into times 1 over 2. So we're going to do that on both sides. So let's not forget our balance. So we're going to multiply both sides by 1 over 2. Okay? So now we're going to do, so we know 2 over 1 times 1 over 2. 2 times 1 would give us 2. 2 times 1 would give us 2. And that's how we can see this is going to cancel out. So we're just going to be left with r, and then we're going to do our fraction multiplication down here. Okay, so we have 1 times -2. That's going to give us -2. And 2 times 3 is going to give us 6. So our final answer is going to be -2 over 6. And remember, you could simplify this, but we're just going to focus on our reciprocals and solving problems for today. So next class, maybe we'll focus on simplifying the fractions as well. Okay? So just to recap, we did have a mixed number here. We had to change it into an improper fraction. Okay? We had a whole number, but we put it over 1, and so we can multiply by its reciprocal. And then we just did our basic multiplication of fractions, and we got our answer of -2 over 6.